Hey guys, this is Tho Bishop with Radio Rothbard, and I wanted to let you know about an exciting event we have coming up on September 23rd in Nashville, Tennessee. One of Ron Paul's favorite lines was, "Truth is treason in the empire of lies." Americans around the country are waking up to this reality. War across the globe, regulating free speech at home, printing trillions of dollars. The regime accepts no limits to its power. Speaking on this topic, we all have brave truth tellers, including Ted Carpenter, Michael Rechtenwald, Jonathan Newman, and many more. Again, this is on September 23rd in beautiful Nashville, Tennessee. You can find more about this event and get your tickets at Mises.org/Nashville23. Hey everyone, welcome back to Radio Rothbard. This is Tho Bishop, joined, as always, by my co-host, Ryan McMaken. We've got a special guest with us today. We have Econ Bro, who is the founder of Nigerian Liberty, which is doing great work, educational work in Nigeria, promoting Austrian economics, publications of the Mises Institute, seminars with students. And we're going to discuss a little bit about spreading the ideas of Austrian economics in his country, the prospects for Africa broadly. And very excited to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm also very pleased to be here.
So you have already had live events going on in Nigeria about Austrian economics, and you gave some great talks about specific economic issues in your country. Also touching on one of Ryan and my favorite topics, which is the cultural consequences of inflation in this monetary policy event.
Yes.
So I guess starting off with, how did the ideas of Austrian economics get to Nigeria? What was your exposure to the Mises Institute, and what made you want to take up this cause and to try to spread these ideas to a new generation of Nigerians?
So I won't say the ideas of Austrian economics have gotten to Nigeria yet. I would say as far as I know, I'm the only one doing this here. So I can only talk about how I got into Austrian economics. So maybe in the future, someone would tell the story and say they heard about it from me. But for now, I don't know of anyone else. I have a couple of friends who are into it as well, but I don't know of any major Austrian movement. I don't know of any at all. Whatsoever. So let me speak to how I became aware of Austrian economics. Basically, I was a conservative. I followed Thomas Sowell, the works of Thomas Sowell, Milton Friedman, F.A. Hayek. So after my studies at the university, I studied economics at university, and the things I studied really didn't make any sense to me. They didn't add up. And I don't have to explain to people that Nigeria is a poor country, and we keep having minister after minister, central bank governor after central bank governor. So our central bank governor is what you guys would call the chairman of the Fed. We call ours a governor of our central bank. So we have them. Every 4 years, we have new governors and new ministers, and nothing ever happens, right? So I set out to find out actual solutions to the economic problems in my country. That was so in my study, I came across Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, as I said, F.A. Hayek, but I didn't really know anything about Mises, or I had heard of Mises in school. He was mentioned like some fringe crazy dude when we were taught the history of economic thought. I had never heard of Rothbard. But I was very, very familiar with how markets work because, as I said, Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman, F.A. Hayek. So last year was actually when I made the transition from monetarist economist, from conservative to an Austro-libertarian, which is what I call myself now. Last year was when I made the transition. I was watching a podcast, Patrick Bet-David podcast. It had Larry Sharp, Spike Cohen, and Dave Smith. So three of them were talking, and I said, let me give the libertarians a chance, because I have a couple of libertarian friends here in Nigeria, a handful of them that I used to go back and forth with. We used to argue on issues, but I didn't find any of the arguments convincing. So I just thought these libertarians are not serious people. And whenever I would encounter libertarians online, it's usually the people from groups like Reason Magazine, and they just weren't my style. So I just felt all libertarians were that way. So it was last year, while listening to Dave Smith, Spike Cohn, and Larry Sharp on the PBD podcast, all their arguments were making so much sense to me. You know, I was like, if these guys are libertarian, then I'm a libertarian. I like what they're saying. And Patrick Bet-David, the host, asked Dave Smith a question saying, what do you libertarians have? What problem do you libertarians have with someone like a Milton Friedman? And I was waiting to hear, I was eager to hear what Dave Smith would say to that. And then he said, we don't actually have many problems with, and I'm paraphrasing, of course. He said, we don't have many problems with Milton Friedman, but he said, I'm more of a Rothbardian, you know, and I had no idea what that meant. So I looked up Rothbardian, and then I found Rothbard, and I wasn't a fan at first. I really wasn't a fan at first, and then so I started to, because of following Dave Smith and a couple of other people, I came across many other people. By the way, I was familiar with the works of the Mises Institute. I used to watch videos from maybe like 2009, 2008, you know, but it wasn't something I paid particular attention to. I would just watch maybe some lecture from maybe Tom Woods or someone, but it wasn't a thing for me. So anyway, I started to follow other, should I say, libertarians on Twitter. And one day I was discussing with a lady called Hannah Cox. I tweeted at her, then I asked her, what would she recommend to new libertarians? And then she recommended Bastiat's The Law and Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. And just like that, I listened to, I was done with Bastiat in like, it didn't take me up to a day to be done with The Law. And then I read Economics in One Lesson. I listened to Economics in One Lesson, and I was hooked instantly. And in the introduction to the book, I heard the Henry Hazlitt, he attributed the research in the book to the works of Mises. And I was like, oh, okay, this Mises guy must be really special. So I looked him up and then came across his books. And then from there, I found out Rothbard was a student of Mises. So then I decided to take Rothbard serious. And it was pretty much the best thing that has happened to me apart from my Christian faith in my life, you know, discovering Mises and Rothbard. And since then, I've just been consuming Mises, Rothbard, Joe Salerno, Tom Woods, you know, Robert Murphy, Perp Island. So I've read pretty much everything there is at this point. Not everything, but I've read most of the good stuff. I'm reading Hopper, you know. So yeah, that's how I got into Austro-libertarianism, and I found the argument extremely convincing. So then I decided to do something about it. So the first step I took was I tried to, because we had our elections in May, presidential and gubernatorial and senatorial elections in May. So I opened a Twitter account to try to reach out to people. And then I tried to reach out to presidential candidates. I went to their campaign offices, and because of issues I won't go into here, no one really listened to what I had to say, you know. They all admitted, young man, you're very intelligent. What you're saying makes a lot of sense. Obviously it does, but nobody was willing to, I won't go into that. Maybe if we ever meet face to face, I'll tell you what happened, why the excuse they gave me when they shut me down. So I decided, rather than try to reach politicians, I'll take the message to the people myself. That was what I decided I was going to do. And then I got support from a couple of friends over there in the West, a couple of friends here, some of my savings, and I decided to host my first seminar where, and you know, the rest is recent history, I would say. So I started to teach this stuff and give out books to students here. So yeah, that's pretty much the story.
No, that rings very, very true. I mean, it's very exciting to see someone want to take up the cause and this and kind of evangelizing proper economics, particularly in the world we have right now. Your story reminds me a lot of my own. I was an Ayn Rand fan to start off with, and then once I discovered economics in one lesson and Bastiat, and that creates that sort of rabbit hole where all of a sudden you go down. I think it was Rothbard's History of Economic Thought that really just sort of blew in my mind, and also the different directions, the history of these ideas, and seeing the impact on civilization. It's fascinating how once the light bulb comes on, you have that excitement, you have that access to this important knowledge, and trying to bring about others to understand these things that are so important. So very excited for the energy and again, not only just talking about it online through Twitter, but trying to bring people together to talk about these ideas is very exciting.
It really is,
And so can we talk a little bit about, and I know with your Substack out there, you have written a few articles already trying to understand, trying to explain some of the problems that Nigeria has. And I know one topic you've written a few articles on is the kind of the political consequences in the response to removing fuel subsidies that the recent government has done. And obviously fuel subsidies are a bad form of intervention, but they're popular, right? People like cheaper things. And yet the response to that politically then after the good thing of removing the fuel subsidies has created attempts to create other more popular programs out there. So can you talk a little bit about this dynamic on how within the Nigerian political environment, one good policy is kind of creating other bad policies, and kind of explain for some of our listeners, what some of this dynamic going on in Nigeria?
Okay, sure. So we've had fuel subsidies since I was born. We've never had a time in Nigeria where when fuel was not subsidized. I believe you guys call it gasoline over there. We call it petrol here. So I'll just call it fuel. Let me just do that. So we've never had a time in since I was born where we didn't have fuel subsidized, and the government spends literally billions of US dollars every year subsidizing fuel. And every president campaign saying, I'm going to take away the subsidies. The subsidies are a burden on the economy. And then no one ever does it when they get into office. And by the way, there is a very big scam, or should I say there was a very big scam. It's not a secret here with the subsidy payment. So when marketers buy the fuel from, so we obviously Nigeria is one of the top oil producing countries in the world. We used to be like top 10 at some point. I don't know what number we're at now, but we produce a lot of oil here. That's pretty much all we produce. But we don't have refineries here, so we have to import refined products, which is just pathetic, very, very pathetic. We have to import refined products here, gasoline, diesel, and natural gas, all that stuff. So what happens is when they import, the marketers import the refined products here, and then the government pays a subsidy to them. So the government pays more than half of the cost. So that's pretty much how it works. So we have this scam going on here where marketers just bring in documents and say, we brought in maybe 1 million liters of petrol, and they didn't bring in anything, and they just get the subsidy payments. So every president knows, everyone, it's not a secret. I'm sure some Nigerian listeners are going to be mad at me for saying this, and because that's how we are here. They'll say I'm exposing the country, but everybody knows this. It's not hidden. There are articles about it. So every president comes in saying, I'm going to take out the subsidies to stop all that from happening. And then finally, the new president came in June, and he was sworn in June, and first day he canceled the subsidy. He announced that he was going to cancel the subsidy payments, and people are losing their minds. By the way, this president is in no way a capitalist. He's a pure Keynesian through and through. Pure Keynesian. He's been in office since May, and the money supply is expanding like crazy. So I'll get into that later. So he he's in no way capitalist. So his idea is to take away the money from fuel they pay to subsidize fuel and use that money to spend on education or some insert government intervention program of your choice. That's pretty much what he's advocating, the current president. So that's where we're at. Now, fuel is very, very expensive relative to, should I say, the minimum wage here, relative to average wages here. Fuel is very, very expensive for people now. The roads are empty. You don't have people going out as much as they used to. I see it. So things are pretty much slowing down because people don't have fuel for their vehicles anymore. So people are complaining and saying the subsidies should be put, we should resume paying the subsidies, and the president is saying no. So labor groups are protesting left, right, and center. So now this is where my writing comes in. Our economists in this part of in Nigeria are all suggesting that some are saying bring back the subsidies, others are saying use that money to invest in government public transport, trains, buses, pretty much just transferring the subsidies from one area to another. So in my writings, I've been pointing out how all those ideas of increasing the minimum wage, that's something that's been suggested, subsidizing transport, spending on education or whatever. So basically, I'm writing to explain how those interventionist policies, they will actually end up being equal to or worse than the fuel subsidies. So I don't understand how people believe that there is corruption in fuel subsidies, but somehow in the transport sector there would be no corruption. That makes no sense to me. I don't understand what it is about transportation or education that makes it's impervious to the same amount of corruption. Now, this is just on the issue of corruption. Let's not talk about things like crowding out and other negative consequences that come as a result of the government spending, So I'm not even focusing on the fact that government spending on its own is bad. I'm just focusing on the fact that even if, let's assume for the sake of argument, that they could government spending wasn't bad, those areas they want to spend the money are not impervious to corruption. They're absolutely not. So basically, I'm writing pointing out that spending the money elsewhere is not the solution. And I've advised that the government of Nigeria only needs to do 3 simple things. Number 1, the most important, stop expanding the money supply. That needs to stop, but they keep expanding it. They keep expanding credit. They just reduced, we call it the CRR here, the reserve ratio here. We were at 32%. So the government, the banks have to keep 32.5% of deposits in the bank. So they can only expand credit by like 67.5% or so. But now they've reduced it, I believe, to 10%. So they can, the money multiplier is like 1/10, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember what the equation is. Well, basically, credit is expanding, and I'm beginning to see signs that of credit expansion. Most of the abandoned housing projects, by the way, Ludwig von Mises was a genius, because he pointed out that one of the places where you start to see and the effect of credit expansion is in the housing sector. And the same thing is happening here right now. So I've noticed housing projects that were abandoned, they've started to work on them again, right? And I'm pointing out this is dangerous. This credit expansion is going to cause malinvestments. Things are going to go bad in the long run. Maybe not so long in the future. And everyone is calling me crazy that can't I see business is moving and things are beginning to pick up. And I'm like, okay, we'll wait and see how things play out. So basically, I've counseled in my writing, on Twitter, anyone I talk to, I tell them, stop expanding money and credit. That needs to stop. Prices are already unbelievably high for us here. So stop expanding the money supply. That has to be the first step. Then second, cut taxes. cut taxes, make Nigeria the cheapest place in the world for people to want to invest in refining petroleum. Why don't we have refineries working here? Because the government, we have a corporate income tax rate of 30%. We have a personal income tax rate of 24%, and so many other taxes. There are about 200 taxes businesses have to pay in the country. It's ridiculous. So make Nigeria the cheapest place in the world for people to want to refine fuel by cutting taxes and useless regulation. Regulation is another story here. So cut all those things, make Nigeria attractive for people to want to build refineries here. And I've also recommended that we pull out of OPEC. OPEC is a thorn in the side of everybody in the world. So I've been trying to make the argument recently that fuel price, crude prices is artificially high because of the green agenda. I heard President Joe Biden say no more drilling on federal land, whatever. I don't know why, but because of the whole green push, we're not producing, the world isn't producing as much oil as it's supposed to. And then here in Nigeria, we have, because we're under OPEC, we have quotas. We are not allowed to produce, I think, more than 1.8 million barrels a day, even though we have the capacity to do way more than that. So oil prices are artificially high. If the supply increases, then the oil prices will drop. And because everyone is saying, even if we cut taxes and do all that stuff, the price of refined petroleum will not reduce because of the cost of crude. So I'm saying, why do we have to be a part of OPEC? Why do we have to produce oil at 1.8 million barrels a day? Why can't we produce 6 million barrels a day? Why can't we do that? Why can't we flood the market and cause the prices to drop so that as crude oil prices drop, then crude oil is the raw material for making refined petroleum product, then we get basically leave OPEC, right? Cut taxes, cut regulation, and stop printing money. It's not difficult. You don't have to spend money to do any of these things I've said. And if we do that, so currently a liter of oil here is 617 naira, which is nothing compared to what you guys pay. That's more expensive. But you guys have higher standards of living, higher wages and all that. So 617 naira per liter here is a very big deal for people. I can't remember the last time I filled up the tank of my car. I can't remember. I haven't filled up the tank of my car in a long time, and I'm not the only one. It's pretty much only rich people, super rich people who can fill up the tanks of their cars. So basically, this is what I'm talking too fast.
No, you're doing fine.
Yeah, I find you easy enough to understand. I certainly have questions, though, about some of these details about the situation in Nigeria. I mean, we ran an article recently which had emphasized the fact that most Americans don't realize, which is that in most of the world, the oil resources are owned and drilled and essentially controlled by a government corporation. Is that the situation in Nigeria also? There aren't really private oil companies?
No. We have Shell here. I believe Shell is global. We have Total, we have Texaco, some of the big companies all over the world, but they're all controlled by the government's, and it's called the NNPC, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. So they are the monopoly here. They determine who does what, So there is no private ownership of anything here. So at best, we have a very weird crony capitalist corporatist setup here, but it's pretty much run by the government.
And I see that the current president of Nigeria used to be an executive with Mobil Oil in Nigeria, which is an interesting connection there.
I didn't even know that. But I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I think the United States is nearly unique in terms of private ownership of below-ground resources. There's probably some other countries where that is the case, but heavy dose of government sector in all of that. And Nigeria also has natural gas, right? Because I just noticed I just learned just the other day that there's an important pipeline that goes from Nigeria, southern Nigeria, up through Niger, which is now suddenly a country in the news, and takes natural gas to Europe across the Mediterranean. So I assume is that subsidized locally as well, or is this a more normal export for Nigeria? Is there is money coming in through natural gas sales, or is that just a complete basket case also?
I don't know the details of the natural gas sector. So I can't really speak to that. However, this is Nigeria. I'm pretty sure there's some funny business going on there.
Sure. This brings me to the question then of I liked your comments on the money supply expansion. So what is the motivation for expanding the money supply? Now, in Latin America, it imploded from hyperinflation in the 80s. And a lot of that was motivated just simply by these countries were running huge deficits, their governments were. And so they were basically just printing money to expand government spending so they could hand out free money to various cronies and the population at large and so on. But they're also, if you're a Keynesian, you might also believe expanding the money supply actually improves the economy in many cases. So what is the motivation in Nigeria for that? Is it just so that the regime will have more money, so they're basically printing it? Or is it because they believe that they can expand the economy by expanding the money supply? Or maybe it's just both. And
exactly, it's both. Yeah, it's both. So our economists tell them when the economy is slowing down, what we need is more spending. So how do we spend? Print the money and spend it. So and the government is all too happy to do that, right? Because when they start giving out free cash, people are happy about that stuff. So, it's win-win for them. And then at the end of the day, we all suffer the consequences. So it's a combination of both.
So I'm guessing that, like the U.S., in spite of all of these taxes, they're still running a substantial deficit at the national level?
Yes.
I sometimes find it's helpful to remind our audience that other countries aren't spectacularly well run, because what happens is people they know the details of just how awful their own governments are, and I think they often assume that other governments are better run, and that's I find that's usually not a good assumption.
No, it's not. It's not.
Right, and the result,
things are just as bad here.
When I see that the result right now is that Nigeria's inflation rate is over 20%. Is looking at, I saw a report from July that it's at a 17.5-year high. And so clearly the consequences of some of these government policies, by the new president is directly responding, or that has the consequences that you would expect, is that inflation is running hot, even relative to some of the recent years.
So first of all, I don't believe the government statistics here. I've maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but I've tried to go to the central bank and the statistics bureau here to get information, and I've seen the way those people operate. There is no way those statistics are real. Let me just leave it at that. But apart from that, Murray Rothbard once spoke about how the CPI is a fraudulent measure of inflation, right? Of measuring the price level, and he said. So if I remember clearly, properly, it was a video I was watching, and he spoke about how different people have different levels of inflation, right? So the 21% is not, my personal inflation is not 21%. It's way over 200%. Everything I used to buy is like 2 times more expensive, 2-3 times more expensive. So let's take fuel, right? Fuel was about 200 naira per liter a couple of months ago, and it's 617 now. So that's like 3 times what it was just a couple of months ago, right? So this has to do with the removal of the subsidy and not with expansion of money. But I'm just saying, if you are going to calculate inflation, you should put things like fuel and food into consideration. I don't know how they came up with that 21%, but personally, my inflation is certainly more than that. The things I pay for have doubled and in some cases tripled in price. And it's not like I'm out buying Bugattis or something, right? I'm paying for regular things that everyone buys. So I maybe so again, let me be fair. Nigeria is in. I think we have the highest level of extreme poverty in the world right now. So we have, I think, over 100 million people living in extreme poverty right now. So for those people who live off the land, maybe they just farm corn, cassava, carbohydrates basically, and they eat what they farm. For those people, maybe they've experienced a 20% or a 21% increase in the prices. And those people are actually the majority of the people in the country. But for those of us who live in the major cities, the educated population, and I don't say this to be condescending to those who are uneducated. I'm just stating facts here. I have to be careful with my words because my people are really weird. They take offense. One of the reasons why for now I've chosen not to make my identity public because people are really weird here. They can come after you, So when I'm big enough to protect myself, then I can, tell everyone who I am and all that. I don't really care for myself. I care for people around me. Anyway, moving on from that. So, but for people who live in the cities, I don't believe that 21% is real. I don't believe it. So, it's way higher.
The Central Bank of Nigeria is saying that, compared to other African countries, things in Nigeria aren't too bad. So at least you can have that reassurance right there.
The absence of a massive civil war is always a good thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're rich. But yeah, of course, it's easy to avoid CPI inflation if you're just living off the land and your standard of living super low. I mean, yeah, but then your standard of living super low. So yes, if you actually purchase goods that require labor, someone else's labor, and a variety of steps through the manufacturing process, that's where a lot of those extra costs come in. So, yeah, it would make total sense that the more urban you are, that the higher prices you're going to pay.
Yeah. So there's something that my first ever article I posted on Substack was about how the central bank is responsible for the decline in product quality. That's a very big problem here. Every product is declining in quality, quantity and quality. Everything tastes like garbage. Everything tastes like garbage. Everything produced, everything manufactured tastes like garbage. Biscuits don't taste as good as they used to taste. They everything tastes bad. I'm not. So I'm a foodie. That's I love to eat and cook. So everything tastes horrible. It's not just that. So in order for businesses to stay afloat, they are starting to cut quality. So it's not just reduction in price, increase in prices. It's also reduction in quantity and in quality. As I said, I'm a foodie, so I notice these things. Everything is bad.
Well, here we call that shrinkflation, where you had a candy bar that was 14 ounces last year is now 12 ounces, but it's the same price. Or one example I saw recently, though, you like this, where it was the exact same size candy bar, but they stuck a big sign on it. It was a big, like a Starburst label that said, now bigger size. So they just tried to fool you into thinking it was a bigger size, but the size hadn't changed at all. So the price went up.
We have that here too.
Since you did such a good job of sort of understanding that the kind of the secondary consequences of the inflation problems, what has been your feedback with talking to other Nigerians about it? What was the sort of response that you got talking about the secondary consequences of what the central bank is doing, of these various forms of government intervention? Is there something that particularly resonates with your fellow Nigerians where they can feel that experience. They realize that the quality of the food that's manufactured is worse off. Are they receptive to you bringing it back to these sort of core Austrian concepts?
Yes, the people I've spoken to, so different people respond to, everybody's feeling the heat of higher prices, right? Everybody's feeling, so I don't need to sell that one too much. I don't need to preach, like the seminar I hosted a couple of months in June. Once I started to talk about high prices, everybody was like, yeah, next, everybody knows that already. So everybody feels that, but there are other cultural consequences that touch. So there's a lot of crime here now. Kidnappings are like the most, kidnapping is the most lucrative enterprise in Nigeria now. People get kidnapped and their families are made to pay money, ransom money, and it's a thing now. We didn't have that 2-3 years ago, but now every month, they're kidnapping girls in this school, or people people are hijacking trains and kidnapping, and they don't just kidnap people, right? Something happened last year, and I shared this on a show with someone yesterday. A train was going from Abuja, the capital city, to Kaduna, and a couple of militants hijacked the train. I don't know how they derailed the train. I don't know the details. And then they shot up the train and took a couple of people hostage. And a girl was on the train. She was shot and she was bleeding. A young girl, right? So she was tweeting. She had gotten in touch with her family, but she was tweeting that the train just got hijacked and people were kidnapped. They didn't kidnap me. They thought I was dead. And those who support the government here were calling her a bitch and saying, pardon my use of the word, I just have to say what they were saying. So calling her a bitch and saying, you just got shot and you are tweeting at Nigerians. Nigerians are lying. You people just hate the government, that kind of stuff. And then the following morning, when the police actually went to the middle of nowhere where the train was derailed, they found her corpse. She was dead. And then the government had young girl. I'm older than this girl was, so we have that all the time. A personal friend of mine, a personal friend. So this is not something I heard on the news or I saw on Twitter. Her father is a minister of the gospel. He's a preacher, right? Like myself, I'm a preacher. I don't know if I've told you that, though. That's what I do. I'm a Christian preacher. That's part of the work I do. So her father went to traveled for some evangelism in another state, and he was kidnapped, and the family made the family pay a very huge ransom, and after paying the money, they still killed the man. So that kind of thing is, now this is someone I know, it hits very close to home. Just literally like a stone throw away from my house, a man was kidnapped just a few weeks ago, like 5 minutes before I passed the very same road on the road to my house, literally a stone throw away from my house, someone was kidnapped and they had to pay ransom and he was released. So that's happening now, and people are paying. People are being kidnapped. It's a thing. It's a thing now. And then another very disgusting, very, very evil, vile consequence of the poverty that we're seeing in the country now. So in the 80s, I grew up in the late 80s and the 90s. So let me say the 90s. So we used to have a lot of movies about ritual killings. It's a thing here. You go meet some witch doctor, and then the witch doctor tells you if you bring the tongue of a virgin or the head of a virgin, you will get rich. They do some voodoo sacrifice nonsense, and then you make money. So it used to happen. I used to hear it a lot when I was a kid, but somehow in the 2000s, all those things just disappeared. Nobody ever. We used to hear whispers, but it wasn't as prominent as it was when I was growing up. All of a sudden, 2001, when the inflation jumped, when prices jumped up, there was a very frightening resurgence of these ritual killings. And now in the age of social media, you have these people recording the heinous acts. There was one on the news. You can easily Google it. Perhaps the story would come up. And if you can't, I'll find it and send it to you. a young man was told by a witch doctor to bring his mother, and then he tried to kill his mother in the house, and she fought with him until she was badly injured, but she put up a good fight, and his mother, his biological mother, not his stepmother, not some random woman who adopted him, his biological mother, he tried to kill her, and then she escaped and called the police. There was a story where, again on the news, where two, I think 10-year-old boys killed a 14-year-old girl because some witch doctor told them so they would make money. We've seen literal videos of young men, from age maybe 16 to 30 to 40. You see them, and please, this is going to be very disgusting. You see them defecating on bread and eating it because some witch doctor told them to do it. These things we heard faint whispers of these things. As I said, they had faded into obscurity, right? In since we entered the new millennium, all those things just faded away. But since 2001, when the prices started, that's when the inflation jumped to super high levels, right? 2021 was when we experienced spikes in the price level. All of a sudden, these things started to happen again. People are doing, money no longer has value. Before, if you have maybe 50,000 naira, it will be enough to take care of you for a month. It's not a large sum of money, but you could get by with 50,000 naira. You can't get by with 100,000 naira today. You can't get by with 200,000 naira today, unless you're living in the rural areas or any of them, But to live a normal 21st century life, 200,000 naira is, you can't live on that amount anymore. And so people are going to extremes to make money, to acquire as much as they can. I'm tying this to government policy, to inflation, because there's a direct correlation, and I know correlation isn't always causation. And I'm not saying that the increase in the money supply is the sole cause. Because there are other places where you have prices rising, but you don't have these kinds of things. You have other kinds of crimes. But seeing as Nigeria is a society where we believe in voodoo nonsense, where we believe in superstitious rubbish, if you combine that kind of superstition with a useless currency, obviously things like this are bound to happen.
Well, I think in any society, right, I mean, there's always going to be people at the margins. Right? Even in the United States, there are people at the margins who are at the lower end of the income scale who, if there were actual economic opportunities in their part of the country, they would be living productive, normal lives. But since there's not opportunities, what you see is rampant suicide, drug abuse, serious social problems, divorce, domestic violence, all those sorts of issues which wouldn't be totally cured in the case of more economic growth, but certainly are made worse by inflation and all of these factors. So it's not a joke when the government does things that impoverish people. I mean, there's real effects to this. It's not just, I can't take a vacation this year. I mean, there are real issues. And maybe if you work in Washington, D.C., or you're a rich kleptocrat in Lagos or something, it's like, hey, what's the big deal, right? So we tax them another 5%. But for people who are living at the margins, it's even in a rich country, it can have disastrous results. But you just don't see many people in the seats of power care about that very much.
Well, speaking of seats of power, but before we head out, I'm curious about the perspective of how is America viewed in Nigeria right now with all of the foreign policy sort of turmoil. I know Nigeria has relationships, a lot of trading relations with the U.S. There've also been some military cooperation with Russia in the past. I know the perspective of kind of America's prestige has changed a great deal in a variety of African countries because of some of the cultural stuff. So before we get out of here, I'm curious about your perspective. How do Nigerians view America on the global stage right now? Is it still kind of seen as the land of opportunity, the romantic view, or is there a change in the way that America is perceived, or do people just not care about that at all because of the domestic issues that you've so vividly outlined? How is America kind of perceived from your lens within this sort of global environment?
People hate America here. No, there is growing resentment, and it's not all based on the truth. Yes, America has done some horrible stuff, right? But most of the hatred for America is because of the nonsense portrayed by the left in America. So we see all we get here is CNN and MSNBC. We don't even get, I'm not a fan of Fox News, but we don't even get Fox News here. So everything everyone hears about America is all the rubbish, all the filth coming out of CNN. So America is racist. They're shooting Black people on the streets. America is a jungle where everyone has guns and are shooting themselves. All that ridiculous nonsense that CNN puts out. So the hatred that people have for America here is not. There are good reasons to hate America, but we don't hate America for those reasons. We hate America for all the wrong reasons. Let me just put it that way. That's how that's how I see it. The people with whom I interact here, they hate America for the wrong reasons. Yeah, I hate America for the central bank. I love the people. I love the level of freedom you guys have, but I hate the Federal Reserve. I hate U.S. foreign policy, So, yeah. But then again, America is literally the only beacon of hope left in the world. There is a tiny light still in America. It's dying out, but it's still there compared to Canada.
Well, I think this is an important point, and I hear this even from people in middle-income countries. I'm thinking of people from Eastern Europe. But even if you talk in frank terms with people, or even from, say, France and Germany and so on, they'll just straight up say, right, the United States is really the only country that that takes seriously that whole laissez-faire liberalism thing, that free market thing. Because even though other countries might embrace certain amounts of market freedom for pragmatic reasons, only in America is there this sense of, well, you can't tax people because it's immoral to do so. And there's a variety of things you can't do because the natural law, my natural rights say you can't do these things. And there's this very heightened sense and defensiveness against government expansion, whereas the government is seen as something quite different. These are all remnants of 18th century liberalism, which I just don't think exist in very many other places on planet Earth at all. Anymore. Certainly not in Canada, not in Australia, which is why they were able to get away with such those harsh lockdowns and so on. So, yeah, I would agree. I think in terms of principled classical liberalism, call it libertarianism, whatever you want, the United States is certainly the place where you get the most of it, even if it is in decline right now. And, yeah, I agree with you. I think many Americans are unaware of just how little of it there is in other countries.
Yeah. They are not aware. People don't really know. People don't really know how good things are in America compared to other parts of the world.
Well, and certainly our ruling regime doesn't value any of that free market stuff, so you wouldn't hear any of that on MSNBC or from Washington politicians anyway. So it's a minority position here.
Yeah.
Well, on that point, thank you so much, Econ Bro, for sharing that perspective and hopefully giving some of us some things to think about. Your organization, Nigerian Liberty, which I know people can reach to help at nigerianliberty.com. So for Econ Bro and Ryan McMaken, this is Tho Bishop. This has been Radio Rothbard. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.